All right, so I have only one article for you today. FTC hosts anti-trans workshop. LGBTQ plus advocates call government-sponsored disinformation. I mean, well, yeah, if it's an anti-trans workshop, and considering that the medical community is not anti-trans, yeah, by just the basics of logic, it's government sponsored disinformation. So let's see what the Yahoos have to say. The Federal Trade Commission on Wednesday held a workshop that public health experts and LGBTQ plus advocates condemned as a government-sponsored disinformation campaign, bringing together a lineup of anti-trans activists, attorneys, and right-wing medical professionals to attack gender-affirming care for transgender youth. FTC Chair Andrew Ferguson framed the event as an investigation into potential fraud and deception in medical treatment, just weeks after the U.S. Supreme Court's landmark U.S. v. Scrimetti ruling upheld Tennessee's ban on gender-affirming care for minors. That decision, which civil rights groups have called a devastating blow, opened the door for more than 24 states to enforce similar prohibitions on puberty blockers and hormone therapy, despite decades of medical consensus supporting such care as safe and effective. Because obviously they think that people will just lay down and believe you when the administration throws out words like fraud. Because, they claim to do that with Doge and the One Big Beautiful Bill, and it turns out both were gigantic piles of bullshit. Ferguson, who previously served as chief counsel to former Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, that explains everything, and a Virginia Solicitor General, opened the workshop with a blistering critique of the Biden administration. Okay, what, you think trans care started with Biden? Alrighty, whatever. Where'd I leave off? And gender-affirming care providers. Okay. He alleged that the administration pressured the World Professional Association for Transgender Health to remove age minimum for hormones and surgeries from its guidelines to avoid fueling legislative bans. Science was beside the point, Ferguson said. They cared about politics. They didn't care about people. Oh, the irony. My irony meter went off so hard, I now have a migraine. What the hell? The only people who are playing politics with trans kids are the transphobes. Everyone else follows the science. You just do not like where the science leads. So you've decided to ignore it and come up with your own science. That's not how science works. And nobody removed minimum age requirements for surgeries. It's just that if that were the case, then there would be more surgeries happening. No, it's just simply that there are certain people whose gender dysphoria is just so bad that even before they turn 18, they need to have surgeries. Most people are just fine with social transitioning or puberty blockers. Which, I mean, and those aren't hormones either. Those are preventing your natural hormones from blowing up, i.e. puberty. So the person has a chance to either come to grips with the fact that they are going through puberty, or that they have time to decide whether they really are trans. Which puberty do they want to go through? Because I know this is hard for people to believe, But when trans people, and I'm talking trans people who've gone through puberty as teenagers, when they get off of puberty blockers and they start taking when they start taking opposite sex hormones, they go through a second puberty. The first puberty was their natural puberty. The second one is from the cross-sex hormones that they're taking. So they end up going through puberty twice. I mean, this isn't something people take lightly here. So, no, nobody is forcing anything. No age requirements were removed. I'm pretty sure that nothing that comes out of his pie hole is remotely correct. Because again, I would bet anything he's referring to puberty blockers as hormones, which, again, they're not. They are the exact opposite of hormones. And in the rare case that teenagers do need to have surgeries or be put on hormones, it's because the gender dysphoria is just that bad. It's not because some minimum age requirements were removed. There is still a standard of care. It's not the Wild West. It's just, you did maybe 2 seconds of research and decided you know everything about the process. If that. Describing gender-affirming care as rife with modern snake oil salesmen, Ferguson claimed that families were being lured by the promise of a fail-safe cure for mental health problems, while being kept in the dark about the permanent and irreversible effects of medical transitioning. He recounted emotionally charged stories from individuals who regret their transitions, saying, "These are not stories of liberation, but of desperation." Okay. So much to unpack in this paragraph. All right. First off, are there going to be, just like in literally any profession, are there going to be quacks? Of course there are. Nobody is disputing that there aren't going to be people who are taking advantage of vulnerable people. That's been the case since the beginning of time, of con men taking advantage of the vulnerable. That's always been a thing. That's never going to change. Assholes are going to asshole. That is not a mark against doing gender-affirming care. Because if we took away everything that has been exploited by con men, charities wouldn't exist, government wouldn't exist, literally nothing would exist. No societal organization would exist. We would be living in total anarchy where it's everyone for themselves, because everything we have ever done, people have found a way to exploit. So that is a horrible argument. That ranks up there with Second Amendment advocates whining that guns, people are going to commit crimes anyway. So why should we regulate guns? Which is a great argument for saying no laws should exist, because pretty much every law we have has been broken at some point. Same thing here. To say that people will exploit others is not an argument against helping those people. It is just so weird that that's being used as an argument, that he thinks that that's a good argument to tell people that this, people are getting exploited, so we should just shut the whole thing down. People get exploited in so many other ways. I don't know what you think happens in the rest of the world. Okay. Fail-safe cure for mental health problems. Nobody fucking says it's a fail-safe cure. If you talk to any trans person ever, you will know that they still have gender dysphoria. It doesn't completely go away. It alleviates it, but it doesn't completely eliminate it. Mainly because a lot of people have this unrealistic notion of what being the opposite sex actually entails. So there might be a little bit of that. But mental health problems. Okay. Now, let's pretend that trans people actually do possess mental health problems. And no, I'm not saying that they do. I'm entertaining this bullshit argument. Even if that's the case, a lot of the people who talk about how trans people are just mentally ill don't actually have compassion for mental illness, because the way they phrase these questions and these claims of outrage that how we're treating the mentally ill, they seem to not understand. First off, they show that they don't have compassion for the mentally ill, and they don't understand what happens when you deal with mentally ill people. Dealing with mentally ill people means curing the mental illness. If you are depressed, you get put on antidepressants. If you have ADHD, you get put on certain medications. If you are schizophrenic, you get put on certain medications. That might not be a cure, but it's supposed to alleviate your symptoms. That is what we are doing when we alleviate gender dysphoria. That is what transitioning does. It's the same damn thing that we do with all mental illness. We alleviate the symptoms so people can live out their lives as productively as possible. So even if it was a mental illness, we are doing the same damn thing that we do when we help with other mental illnesses or any illness. If you have ovarian cysts or uterine fibroids, or God forbid both, which, hi, you have a hysterectomy so you can actually function. Oh, does that make periods so unbearable? We alleviate symptoms so people can go about their day. We do that for mental illness. We do that for physical illness. We do that with everything. Why are people treating transitioning as if this is some novel approach? That if people have gender dysphoria, they transition. And people like to take on this idea of, well, what about the kids that think they're cats? Which isn't a thing. Yes, there have been people who thought that they were different races, but my understanding is that is totally different, because this isn't something that is that the medical community recognizes as a specific symptom of, say, in this case, gender dysphoria. I guess it would be racial dysphoria. I mean, I honestly have no idea why people think that they are a different race. Maybe because they've grown up with the different race, so they think that they happen to be that race, a la The Jerk. For those of you who are Steve Martin fans, I was born a poor black child. Yeah, and that's because he grew up around black people, so he had no. Of course, he was also dumb as a rock, but he had no concept of the fact that he wasn't that. So there are people who might feel more of a kinship towards a certain race, whether they're because they're raised by it or they're just fascinated by the culture. That's not the same as gender dysphoria. I mean, I just don't know. I know that I linked to a video by Forrest Valkai. I think he explains it way better than I could ever why this is just not a thing. Anyway, moving on. And being kept in the dark about permanent and irreversible effects of medical transitioning. Okay, now I get this a lot in my comments, and I'm sure trans people get way too many of them. This assumption that because they went on Google and did a 2-second search and they saw what the potential side effects of certain medical treatments or even puberty blockers are. And so they assume because they didn't know until 2 seconds ago what those symptoms were, what those side effects were, that somehow that means that doctors don't tell their patients about it. Again, not a thing. I mean, are there unscrupulous doctors who don't tell their patients shit? Of course there are. You could find that in any specialty of a doctor who just phones it in, tells you what your problems are, but doesn't explain anything to you and doesn't listen to you. You'll find that anywhere. So I'm not saying that it's impossible, but the assumption from a cis person that because I just learned about something a second ago, that must mean that trans people never heard of it. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And as for the stories of individuals who regret their transitions, I did a video a while back pointing out that the biggest reason that trans people detransition or regret their transitions is because they don't actually regret it. More likely they are surrounded by people who don't support them. And so they decided that detransitioning would be easier and living life as the gender you don't feel that you are is easier than losing that support system that you would have had otherwise. Yes, there are some people who realized, oops, we made a mistake. Now, I'm not going to play the blame game like this schmuck is doing. Could it be that the doctors didn't do their due diligence? It's possible. Is it possible that the person involved really sold it so they made it sound like their gender dysphoria was worse than it really was? That's a possibility too. People tend to overreact to certain symptoms that they think, oh, I must have this, I must have that. That's normal. The idea that you just learn about a disease and suddenly you think you have it, that type of thing. So I'm not going to say it's a fault of one side or the other. You would hope that physicians would figure it out before they start with the transitioning, with the medical transitioning, that is. But, again, mistakes happen. For whatever reason, mistakes happen. Again, maybe your physician is shit and didn't do their due diligence, or maybe you really hyped up a symptom that, looking back, wasn't that big of a deal. So it could go either way. But the fact that there are people who regret their transition, even of those who genuinely regret it, and not those who are just like, all right, fine, you win. Those are sad tales, obviously. I'm not going to gloss over their pain. But that does not mean that because some people regret it, that means that no child should be allowed to transition ever. Because just like everything else, every child is different. Many will go through transitions and, it'll be fine. Will there be some who the transition turns out to be not the best idea for them? I would think that with better healthcare and better, and the process improves with helping to discover who's trans, I would hope that those become less and less. But you're still having to go by what your patient is telling you. And unless you're finding some inconsistencies in what they're telling you, it's not necessarily the doctor's fault when things go wrong. So, all major medical associations, including the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, the Endocrine Society, and the American Psychiatric Association, broadly endorse gender-affirming care, including for minors, as evidence-based and effective. And that's another thing. If you're going to pick and choose which specialties are complete horseshit because you want to do your own research and you don't trust medical science, blah, 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 may I suggest you do not go to the doctor ever. I mean, never, ever, ever. Because either you trust medical science or you do not. There is no mamby-pamby, oh, well, these people make me feel icky, so I'm going to pretend that they don't exist. No, you don't get to do that. Science doesn't get to decide what's real and what's made up based on feelings. That's not what science is. They follow the facts wherever it leads. Sometimes it leads to a previously conceived notion. Sometimes it leads God knows where. So it could turn out that the opposite of what you thought was true turns out to be true. That's how science works. This is not an opinion-based endeavor. So if a bunch of associations are telling you that this is safe and effective, maybe believe them. If you decide that you know best about vaccines, or you know best about this, or you know best about that, well then, if you went to medical school, great. But if you're just going by feelings and your 2-second Google search, may I suggest you just don't bother going to the doctor for anything. Your appendix about to explode? Either take it out yourself or just let it explode and kill you. Because basically you're telling doctors that I'm only going to trust you when it's stuff that doesn't make me feel icky, or stuff that doesn't make me feel, that makes me feel uncomfortable. No, you don't get to choose which medical science you're going to trust. Either you trust science or you don't. Have there been mistakes in the past? Absolutely. That is not a argument against following the science and listening to science, because you know who made progress and realized that those mistakes were in fact mistakes? Scientists. It's like people think that some plucky band of outsiders were the ones who went to scientists and said, shame, 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 you did a bad thing. And science was like, oh yeah, you're right, I'm going to change to this. It's not how this works. Anyway, Ferguson declared it the FTC's duty to investigate claims around gender-affirming care. We are here to ensure that everyone can make an informed choice about their own path to healing without fear of being deceived by those who stand to profit from certain medical interventions, he said. Americans have a right to health claims substantiated by reliable scientific evidence, no matter how politically charged. Again, irony, because that's literally what you're railing against. You've decided that the science that is most accepted is wrong, and you're going to trust this bogus science, which a bunch of people who have a vested interest in trans people not existing posit. So exactly how is it that it's the other side who are politically charged? No, that would be you. Because nobody on the pro-science side is saying you have to accept that trans people exist or that you have to acknowledge their existence. All they're telling you is that this is what we found, and if you want to be complete asshats to them, if you want to avoid them, fine. You don't have to have anything to do with them. That doesn't change the fact that they exist. Don't be asshats to them. Just walk the other way. If you can't handle the reality that trans people exist, fine. Go the other way. Go hide under a rock. Do what you have to do. Nobody is forcing you to interact with trans people. Nobody. Now, are you going to generally interact with trans people in your day-to-day? Possibly, without knowing. Possibly. Trans people do not have to tell you in basic interactions like meeting someone on the street. They do not have to tell you that they are trans. Are there certain situations? Absolutely, especially when you're dating, because, well, there are preferences. But it's not like they walk around with a tattoo saying, I'm trans. They don't have to do that. You do not have to look around and check who's trans. And believe me, transvestigators are a thing. And I swear that some of these transvestigators are trolls, because the people that they peg as being trans is just so funny. And the reasonings for it is just hysterical. That if it wasn't real and people didn't actually believe it, I would just laugh. But instead you want to cry. Anyway, I'm never going to get through this article. Ferguson declared it I read that already. Okay. Dr. Rachel Levine, who served as an Assistant Secretary for Health during the Biden administration and is the highest ranking out transgender federal official in U.S. history, told The Advocate that the workshop was the product of the Project 2025 playbook, developed by the conservative think tanks like the Heritage Foundation, to systemically target transgender people after losing the fight over marriage equality. It has been made a political and ideological issue, she said, emphasizing that the evidence base is strong for the safety and efficacy of these treatments, while also noting that, as with all areas of medicine, research should continue to evolve. Exactly. What we know now, we're going to improve. Are there going to be mistakes? Probably. Are they going to develop better methods and better treatments in all areas? Of course they are, because science doesn't stop. They keep wanting to learn more, how to do this better, how to do that better. The only people who do not give a living shit about improvement are the MAGA heads. These are the people who do not care. Before I continue, so Dr. Rachel Levine, or Levine, I'm not sure. She had to deal with all sorts of transphobia whenever she had to testify in front of Congress, because Republicans just could not handle the fact that she was a trans woman. They had to ask all sorts of questions, and they didn't do it in a general, do trans people do this, or trans people are like this, or whatever. They asked personal questions of her. It was just gross. Let's see, what else did I want to mention? Oh, yes, I was going to go off on a tangent. So I just had a conversation where on Facebook, so you know that it was potentially toxic. So there was this person, one of our local stations, Channel 7, posted a article about the backlash that Trump has been receiving because he praised the president of Liberia's English and asking him where he was educated, which, for those who aren't aware, English is the official language of Liberia. So, of course, he learned in Liberia because that's their national language. Now, this schmuck did not know that. Now, will I forgive him for not knowing that? Of course. The president should sure as shit know what the official language of the president you're speaking to is. How hard is it to have your advisors come up to you and explain to you, this is who this person is, this is what the country is all about? How hard is that? That is the point of advisors. Now, I do not fault this guy for not knowing, but in the actual article that he decided to comment on, how people just knee-jerk have a problem with Trump, as opposed to, reading the article and learning why there was backlash, instead of assuming that it's, what do they call, Trump derangement syndrome. Maybe he could have read the damn article and found out that the reason there's backlash is because Liberia's official language is English. And, the president should absolutely know that. And his response to me was, okay. Because he knows that, at least he was willing to admit by that, oh, okay, that he did not know that because it's not he didn't bother to read the article, and he knows he was caught dead to rights not actually having read the article and learning about the situation and just knee-jerk accusing people of hating Trump. Now, will that teach him to actually learn shit before he just knee-jerk defends Trump? Probably not. But maybe he's going to realize that, oh, maybe I should, try to learn stuff so I don't look like a complete moron. Provided, you actually care about not looking like a moron. So yeah, research. So these are people who, when we say research evolves, they don't want to evolve. These are the same people who think it's basic science, as if the only science you need, you learned in 9th grade, and which you barely passed, if at all, and that why do biologists continue on with advanced schooling? Because all the biology you need is right there. It's just maddening. Oh yes, and another aside about they've moved on to trans people because they lost the fight over marriage equality, which there is a fear that Obergefell might get overturned. So that's a wonderful thing to look forward to. But I just read that the Trump administration removed bi people from the Stonewall Monument. So it's not just trans people they're trying to erase. So for those of you who are part of the LGBT or coalition, because, you think that you might survive if you shit on trans people, no, you're not going to, because they're coming for you next. And let's face it, if you're going to hype Stonewall, it was actually trans women of color who stood up first. So I just do not understand that coalition whatsoever. Anyway, back to the article. During the workshop, Dr. Michael Laidlaw, a California endocrinologist who has testified repeatedly in favor of banning gender-affirming care, declared during his presentation that he has been a longtime member of the Endocrine Society but disagrees with its position on gender-affirming healthcare. Okay. Levine, who did not watch the presentation, responded to reports of it. He said that he's been with the Endocrine Society for many years, and on those 400 other issues, he thinks they get it right, but on this issue, they don't, Levine said. It doesn't make any sense to say, oh, I would absolutely take my child to DC Children's for diabetes, but if I saw the same endocrinologist for gender care, they're wrong. Exactly what I was saying. If you're going to say that medical science is wrong on vaccines and on trans issues, then you're basically saying medical science is wrong on everything. You can't pick and choose what you're going to accept from experts. They are experts for a reason. And you aren't an expert. Conservatives at the FTC workshop repeatedly named Levine, accusing her of pressuring WPATH in 2024 to remove age requirements from its updated standards of care for political reasons. Levine rejected those claims outright. I've never considered myself political. I've always been involved with medicine and public health, she told The Advocate. Levine explained that WPATH publicly circulated a draft of its guidelines and solicited feedback, to which her office submitted comments, like any other entity. We gave a comment. Many different organizations put out comments, and we did too, she said. Because that's how this shit works. That is literally how any of this works. You put out a statement and you give it to separate agencies for their feedback, and you could decide to run with said feedback, or you could decide, okay, this it doesn't sound like it's right, so we're going to drop it, or we're going to modify it somehow, because that's how feedback works. You send a paper in, your teacher gives you feedback on what you wrote, and then you make modifications. That is how shit works. Makes me wonder, did these people ever go to school? Do they know how any of this works? The workshop featured a slate of speakers who have built their public profiles attacking transgender people's healthcare, including psychiatrist Miriam Grossman, activist Aaron Friday of GenSpec, and Jamie Reed, a former gender clinic employee whose widely publicized allegations have been heavily disputed by medical experts. LGBT plus advocates were quick to point out that the event appeared designed to amplify discredited narratives rather than to examine evidence. Kellen Baker, executive director of the Institute for Health Research and Policy at Whitman Walker, said the FTC had grossly violated its mandate by hosting what he described as a political rally dressed up as a government agency. Now, obviously, this isn't just them looking to examine evidence, because if this was a good faith examination, they wouldn't have just people who have anti-trans views. They would have those who are anti-trans, who are pro-reality. They would have people in between. They would have all sorts of viewpoints. But that's not what's happening here. This is the marshaling of pseudoscience and disinformation to advance a political agenda, Baker told The Advocate. It does not actually feature the voices of transgender young people, their families, or the healthcare providers who care for them. Exactly. It's sort of like, talking about women's rights or women's health care, and all you see are middle-aged men or elderly men talking about it. Okay, I'm sure there are some men who actually give a shit about women, but it's not a good look when you're trying to decide for a certain group and there is nobody in that group who's part of the decision-making process. Not a good look at all. Baker noted that regret among people who receive gender-affirming care is exceptionally low, hovering around 1 to 3%, citing published research showing that most young people continue care and experience improvements in mental health. Yet we see a tiny group of people going from congressional hearings to FTC events to other anti-trans venues funded to push these narratives. Baker said he and other health policy experts, medical professionals, and trans advocates are organizing a counter-programming event on Thursday intended to correct the record. Unlike the FTC's workshop, he said, Thursday's forum will feature the voices of medical experts, parents, and transgender young people themselves, the people whose lives are actually affected by these policies. Even as anti-trans narratives echoed in Washington, new research continued to undercut the claims presented at the FTC event. In Utah, Republican lawmakers who banned gender-affirming care for minors in 2023 demanded evidence that such treatment benefits trans youth. That evidence has now arrived, and lawmakers are ignoring it. Exactly, because they didn't get the answer they wanted. They were so sure that science backed up their bigoted views that they cockily put up, let's do this research. Let's look for evidence to prove that we're right. Oh, what? We're not right? Oh, well, obviously that research is bogus. It couldn't possibly be we're wrong because we just feel. Aren't these the same people who say facts over your feelings? And yet they're the ones who care more about their feelings than facts. As the Advocate reported in May, a sweeping 1,000-page report commissioned by the Utah legislature and released in May found that gender-affirming care significantly improves mental health outcomes for trans youth, including reduced rates of depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. Conducted by the University of Utah's Drug Regimen Review Center, the report concluded that the scientific evidence supporting gender-affirming hormone therapy far exceeds the level required for FDA approval of other pediatric treatments. All right. Yeah, this is damning evidence. Evidence that what we are doing to alleviate gender dysphoria is working. Why are people so determined to turn back the clock and put these people in harm's way? Make it so it's just too hard for them to get through the day and they end up killing themselves. I just do not see why people would turn their backs claiming that they actually care about young people. It just boggles my mind when there is obvious evidence, ample evidence, that this actually works. I mean, all I get in the comments, well, occasionally I get things in the comments of people who actually did their own research, but again, okay, that's great. I'd rather listen to experts who, teach their patients the potential side effects and act like because the side effects exist that it's a bad treatment. I have really bad news for you. Just about everything has a side effect. Every chemical has a side effect because it's a freaking chemical. It's just boggles my mind how people will either claim that they know better than experts because they actually did a Google search and decided they know more than experts by that one Google search, or they just don't understand how the process works and say things like, trans people should go to therapy. They do go to therapy, you absolute twat. Are there people out there who genuinely do not understand and genuinely want to learn? Absolutely. And we should not be flippant to them when they obviously want to learn about how things work. But for those who think they have all the answers, absolutely just be flippant towards them because there's no point in talking to them. They've made up their mind and nothing you say will change it. Researchers found that regret was virtually non-existent among trans youth who received care, directly contradicting the anecdote spotlighted by anti-trans activists at the FTC workshop. Like I said, I wonder how many of those regrets are simply people who detransitioned because they didn't want to lose all their support system. They would lose their family, they would lose their friends, and they decided living as the wrong gender would be easier than not having any social network. And that's both sad but also understandable. But that does not mean that that anybody did anything wrong. The doctors didn't do anything wrong. The patient didn't do anything wrong. It's society that did something wrong. Levine called the Utah findings incredibly important, telling the Advocate, "This report confirms what major medical organizations and providers have known for decades, that gender-affirming care is safe, effective, and medically necessary for many youth. It demolishes the misinformation that continues to be pushed in events like this FTC workshop. The science is there. The question is whether politicians will accept it." The Trump administration's approach to gender-affirming care is starkly illustrated on federal websites. Following a court order requiring restoration of HHS informational pages about transgender health, the department's Office of Population Affairs now hosts a page that carries a blunt disclaimer from the administration. Per a court order, HHS is required to restore this document. Any information on this page promoting gender ideology is extremely inaccurate and disconnected from the immutable biological reality that there are two sexes, male and female, the disclaimer reads. I wonder if intersex people know that. The Trump administration rejects gender ideology and condemns the harms it causes to children by promoting their chemical and surgical mutilation, and to women by depriving them their dignity, safety, well-being, and opportunities. This page does not reflect biological reality, and therefore the administration and this department rejects it. Okay. A lot to unpack here, as usual. He rejects gender ideology. Okay, you do understand that if I declare that I am a woman, that is gender ideology. That is my gender ideology because I identify as a woman. Seriously, this is like people saying that people who use pronouns are mentally ill. Everybody fucking uses pronouns. I mean, seriously, what the hell? Okay. It does not promote chemical and surgical mutilation. It does not promote that. If you think that that's promoting chemical and surgical mutilation, then you would have a problem with any and all plastic surgery. Because what is that besides mutilating the body? Let's see. That mutilates the body. Then we have my brain just died. Circumcision when they're a kid, because that's surgical mutilation. Chemical mutilation. What the hell does that even mean? Seriously, what does that mean? Now, and of course, that's assuming that children are getting these surgeries. They're not even getting these hormones. They're most likely only getting puberty blockers, which... What chemical mutilation is that? It's preventing your natural hormones from blowing up so you go through puberty. Okay, that's not mutilation. And to women, the same old shit. Because notice this is not a problem with men. Depriving them of their dignity? What dignity? How is accepting that trans women exist affecting a cis woman's dignity? Safety? I'm sorry. Cis men are the cause of her safety, cause of her problems with safety, not trans women. Well-being? Again, how? And opportunities? Again, how? Yes, there might be some trans women athletes who are better than you, but there are plenty of cis women athletes who are probably better than you as well. So I fail to see the problem. It's not like that trans women are setting the world on fire, and that you never hear of cis women doing well against trans women. That's not how this works. Anyway, and this page does not reflect biological reality. Again, see the video I posted on the community tab from Forrest Valkai. It is very much a biological reality. Just because you do not like it, that it's not clear cut that XY is a boy and XX is a girl, doesn't mean that that's not reality. So, yet the same HHS document, in its substantive content, continues to explain that gender-affirming care is a supportive form of healthcare, and that research demonstrates such care improves the mental health and overall well-being of gender-diverse children and adolescents. The page outlines evidence that gender-affirming interventions, including social transition, puberty blockers, and hormone therapy, are associated with lower rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide among transgender youth, and emphasizes the critical role of family and community support. Right, because just like everything, you want to be supportive of whatever decisions you make. If you come to the realization that you were born, that you are a different gender than the sex you were born, obviously you're going to want to have that support of people around you. But that's the same for literally every decision any person has to make. We're social animals. We do not make decisions in a vacuum, and we always want the people who we care about to support us in whatever decision we make. Whether it be to get married, get divorced, start dating, stop dating, not date at all. It's in every aspect of our lives. Should I take this job? Should I take that job? Should I move here? Should I move there? Nothing is just you making the decision on your own. There are some decisions you make on your own, but generally with just about every decision, whether it be healthcare or anything else, people want other people that they value their opinions and they care about. They want to know their opinions on the subject. So, the science still supports gender-affirming care. American Academy Pediatrics President Dr. Susan Kressley said in a statement after the Scarametti decision, "Children will still need it." As LGBTQ plus advocates brace for further policy assaults, Levine said she remains extremely realistic about how challenging the present is, but insisted the movement would endure. "We have to pick ourselves up and dust ourselves off," she said, and continued the work. The FTC did not respond to requests for comment from the advocate. Another prime example of how they are full of shit. Because if this was a good faith workshop, they would have no problems defending themselves in the advocate. But no, they didn't, because they know they can't defend themselves. Either that or they don't consider the advocate worth mentioning because, oh my God, that's the LGBT plus community and we don't want to even speak to them because we might catch the gay from them or something. All right, so that is the end of that article. I believe I've covered everything I wanted to, And this, wow, just one article, and I'm almost an hour in. I was not expecting that. So anyway, with that, I will see you guys in the next video.